Hello, this is Afternoon Live. I'm Martine Croxall. In a landmark case on freedom of expression, a High Court judge has warned police against acting like the Gestapo or the Stasi when they investigate allegedly transphobic comments on social media. The judge ruled that Humberside police acted disproportionately when they turned up at Harry Miller's place of work and told him his tweets about transgender people were a hate incident. The judge said the police visit had a potentially chilling effect on free speech, saying we have never lived in an Orwellian society. Our legal correspondent Clive Coleman is at the High Court and can talk us through what's been happening. Clive.
Well, Harry Miller is a man who believes that a man cannot become a woman, and he says that he tweets and blogs really as part of a public discussion about the reform of the Gender Recognition Act. That's the act under which a man can legally be recognised as a woman and vice versa. And there's a very heated discussion about proposed reforms. At the moment, the criteria are very stringent and the proposals are that they should become less stringent. Now, he tweets in a way that some people would find offensive. He uses pretty crude language, swear words, body parts and so forth. And in January 2019, a trans woman complained about his tweets. That led Humberside police to go to his place of work. They eventually interviewed him over the phone and warned him that if he continued to tweet in the way he had been, then he could be prosecuted as a result of that. The incident was logged as this strange thing, a non-crime hate incident. Now, that isn't without consequence because it can be disclosed on an enhanced disclosure and barring check if someone's seeking to work for an employer who deals with disabled groups, vulnerable groups and so forth. Harry Miller judicially reviewed both the guidance and the behaviour of Humberside police. I should just say that the guidance really grew out of the Stephen Lawrence case, that tragic case, and the idea behind it is that you damp down hate incidents before they escalate into full-blown hate crimes. Now, he judicially reviewed both, as I say, the guidance and the behaviour of Humberside police. Today, Mr. Justice Julian Knowles ruled that the guidance was entirely lawful, but the way that it had been applied by Humberside police was a disproportionate interference with Harry Miller's right to freedom of expression. Outside court, Harry Miller was delighted.
We have never had a Gestapo or a Stasi in Great Britain, but the actions of Humberside police came way too close for comfort. This is a watershed moment for liberty. The police were wrong to visit my workplace, wrong to check my thinking, wrong in their attempt to force me the Stonewall and now the Labour Party trans right pledge.
Well, the words of Mr. Justice Julian Knowles will be seen by many people as a very robust defence of the right to freedom of expression. And he talks in his ruling about the right to be offensive in what you say. And he says inoffensive, the right to have freedom of speech, which is entirely inoffensive, is a right not worth having. But of course, that's not the view of everybody in terms of this case. And the trans community, and we've spoken to a number of groups in researching this story, they've reacted in a somewhat different way. This is Helen Belcher from the organisation Trans Media Watch.
I think trans people will be worried that it could become open season on us because the court didn't really define what the threshold for acceptable speech was. And I think it will just reinforce an opinion that the courts don't really understand trans lives and aren't there to protect trans people.
So the wording of this judgment, I think, will be studied very carefully by police forces around the country because it really sets the tenor and the tone of what is completely free and legitimate comment online in particular. And I think it will determine when people make a complaint whether the police do investigate and whether they do log this as a non-crime hate incident. I should say that something like in excess of 25,000 non-crime hate incidents are logged by UK police each year. So this is a big issue for the police and they will be picking over this ruling very carefully.
Clive, there is a part of this case, though, that is being referred to the Supreme Court. Tell us about that.
Well, Harry Miller is determined to take his battle on to the Supreme Court. That's at a pretty early stage at this point. But the whole issue of the logging of these non-crime hate incidents, and I say they do have a consequence. They can be turned up. Of course, Martine, we're not just talking about transphobic non-crime hate incidents. The vast majority of these relate to non-crime race hate incidents, non-crime disability hate incidents, because those communities are far bigger than the trans community. As you say, as far as the legal process is concerned, we are seeing more and more legal challenges around the issue. There was an employment tribunal recently where a woman had effectively said that a man can't become a woman, similar to what Harry Miller had said, and sought to have that belief that she held recognised as a philosophical belief akin to a religion. She lost that case. That case could conceivably also go to appeal. So these issues are being chewed over by the courts in employment tribunals, the High Court, and Harry Miller has said that he has plans to take some of these issues to the Supreme Court, but that's pretty early stages at the moment.
Clive, thank you very much. Clive Coleman at the High Court.
This is in relation to the case of Harry Miller. He was visited by Humberside Police at work in January last year. He's a former officer himself, after a complaint about a tweet that he had sent. It was a tweet as part of a debate around trans issues, trans rights, what constitutes a man, what constitutes a woman, that kind of thing. Again, stuff we've talked about here on the programme. And the court found that the police force's actions were a disproportionate interference with his right to freedom of expression. I think, interestingly, some interesting words from the judge in the case, Mr. Justice Julian Knowles, said the effect of police turning up at Mr. Miller's place of work because of his opinions must not be underestimated. To do so is to undervalue a cardinal democratic freedom. In this country, we've never had a Cheka. That's a sort of Soviet Gestapo, the Gestapo, or a Stasi, he said. We've never lived in an Orwellian society. Do you agree with the High Court ruling? 0345 606 0973, the number to call. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC. Let's put some meat on the bone by speaking to the man himself, Harry Miller, former police officer who's won that High Court case after being accused of posting transphobic tweets. Harry, good afternoon to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sheila.
Well, congratulations on your win in the High Court to start with. Take me back, though, to the evening or whenever it was of you actually tweeting. Who were you tweeting? What was the discussion about?
I tweeted between December and January. The government had called upon us to discuss and debate reforms to the GRA. I engaged in
Gender
that
Recognition Act.
The whole notion of self-ID. I got involved in that debate, and then out of the blue, I got a phone call from Humberside Police saying that my tweets were transphobic, and if I continued with them, they may well end up being criminal. The inference there being that I should stop.
And what had you been saying?
Oh, well, I'd done terrible things like saying Sheffield women know the difference between lads and lasses. That was one of the tweets. I'd retweeted an article by Andrew Gilligan who was warning about the medical transitioning of children. These things were deemed by Humberside Police as being evidence of hateful transphobia that might well end up leading me down a criminal pathway similar to that ended up with Stephen Lawrence being murdered at the bus stop.
Who said that?
Humberside Police said that. They said they needed to intervene to prevent escalation, and then cited the Stephen Lawrence case. And I said, this is absolutely, utterly ludicrous, absolutely ridiculous. You cannot do that. You cannot take the murder of a poor black lad in London at the hands of despicable racists and use that to try and silence me in a debate that the government has called for. That is wrong. Actually, Mr. Justice Knowles agreed. He said nothing that I tweeted was even in the foothills of transphobia. It wasn't in the foothills of the harassment, and that the police had acted like the Gestapo and the Stasi.
And one of the tweets that's been brought to my attention was you saying, to make the point that you don't think self-identifying changes much biologically. You know, yes, live the way you wish, but it doesn't change much. But you said I was born a mammal, but I identify as a fish. Doesn't make me a fish.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Because the point there is, if we can identify out of our sex, why can we not identify out of being a mammal? What's the difference? I just don't understand. I don't understand the difference. You know, I can.
And bisexual, you mean biological sex, whereas gender is a different construct.
Sex, yes, but this is also interesting that Mr. Justice Knowles, whilst he didn't address the issue directly, he did take the view that sex was chromosome-based. He said it was chromosome-based. Now, this is really interesting because in the Meyer Vorstatter Employment Tribunal, the judge in that case said that holding a biological view of sex was not worthy of a democratic society.
And yet the judge in your case just did.
Yeah, and our judge absolutely trumps their judge. The High Court judge.
And for people who don't know the Meyer Vorstatter case, she lost her job for stating that biological sex is binary.
Yeah, and the judge in that case said that was a view which was not worthy of a democratic society. Well, that's funny because a High Court judge has used exactly that definition.
Do you look back on any of your tweets and think you could have conducted the discourse more sensitively?
No.
By the way, that does not mean the police should have knocked on your door. But do you? You don't.
No, not at all. Because I did not go after any individual at all. I simply debated. I used sarcasm. I used existential wit. I made commentary. That was it. Now, you know, if we can't do that, what kind of society are we in? We do it all the time. That's what comedies and satire is all about. We're allowed to do that.
You may have heard what Helen Belcher has said. She co-founded Transmedia Watch. She's on a big voice on Twitter herself.
Yeah.
I think trans people will be worried it could become open season on us because the court didn't really define what the threshold for acceptable speech was. I think it will reinforce an opinion. She said that courts don't understand trans lives and aren't there to protect trans people.
Well, the law is very clear. If you go after somebody, if you harass somebody, if you send malicious communications to somebody, that's criminal. And, you know, it's absolutely right that the police should intervene at that point. But there was no suggestion whatsoever that was happening in this case, none whatsoever. So that is they are conflating for political purposes what happened. That's what they're doing.
But you don't have to attack an individual. I'm not saying you were attacking people, but you don't have to attack an individual to create an environment around individuals, if you see what I mean. You know, if I constantly berated people from, I don't know, from a particular city or something, then you create an atmosphere around the individuals who live in that city. You are absolutely happy that even in a non-criminal way, you haven't done that.
No, not at all. I've not. There's no. The judge says I wasn't even in the foothills of that. Not even in the foothills, is what he said. I simply commented around the subject. Now, if we can't comment around a subject because of fear that somebody who disagrees with us might have their feelings hurt, then we don't live in a democracy.
Now, am I right in saying you were not supported in your view that the guidelines on hate incidents are up to scratch?
Yeah. At the moment, Mr. Justice Knowles has said that the guidelines are okay, that they're lawful and they're legal, and that's fine. We will, in fact, challenge that or seek to challenge that at the Supreme Court, mainly because there are 87,000 non-crime crimes that have been recorded under
non-crime incidents.
Non-crime incidents, yeah, non-crime crimes. I mean, can you?
What do you mean? No, what do you mean, non-crime crimes?
We've no idea. But that's what my incident was classed as. It was classed as a non-crime crime. That is Orwellian doublespeak, if ever there was any.
It literally said on the paper, non-crime crime.
Yeah, it says crime reports, category non-crime.
Oh, dear.
Crime, non-crime. That's what it says.
And I should say, it's worth saying, just for people to understand properly, the guidelines define a hate incident as, quote, any non-crime incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by a hostility or prejudice against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender.
Yeah, and it says no evidence of hate is necessary. So that means that anybody at any time can shout out, "Oh, I think that action or those words were fueled by hate," and the police have to go, "Oh yeah, well, we have to believe you." That's nonsense. That's not how British justice works.
Isn't it a little bit how British justice works when, for example, if somebody tries to see me twice and comes to find me and I don't want them to, some people might say that's flattering, but no, thank you. Other people would feel harassed by it, and how the person feels. Well, how the person feels is part of the process, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but then you've got the first person perception. This person is pursuing me. I made it clear that it's unwanted.
As opposed to a woman at the other end of the road who might just interpret it any old way.
The problem with this is that this so-called complainant, Mrs. B, who's never met me, they don't know me, they simply perceived that my workplace was dangerous and that they needed to intervene. That's absolutely. But even worse than that, they said, and this is how crazy it gets. They said that 80 years ago I would have been persecuting the Jews. 80 years. I mean, how can the police possibly take that as being evidence? 80 years ago I wasn't even alive. How could I have been persecuting the Jews? It's just utter bilge water.
Do you have any hostility or prejudice against people who are transgender?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. I just don't think people can change sex. And I think that is important. I think women need protecting from the idea that people can change sex. And the idea that you can change sex simply by saying, "Oh, I've changed sex," is an utter nonsense, and it's a dangerous nonsense, and one that we have a duty to stand up and say, "Now, hold on a minute."
And if, even though it's not your intention, if the upshot of your victory is that someone who does have an issue with transgender people is emboldened, and I know you can't take ownership of other people's behaviour, but if someone is emboldened because of your case, what do you say to them?
I would say stay within the law. Don't harass people. Don't be malicious. Keep your debate respectful and within the bounds of the law. Use sarcasm, use humour, all the rest of it. You can do all of that. Just don't target people. Don't target individuals.
And just to finish, are you going to continue your efforts to change those guidelines that we talked about, the non-crime crimes?
Yeah. We've in fact, the College of Police have agreed that it would be appropriate for us all to go to the Supreme Court because actually this is new territory. And I do believe that the guidelines were written in good faith, actually. I do. I don't think they meant
just some unforeseen circumstances in the...
Yeah.
In the cracks.
I've no real issue with the College of Police, but I think this needs testing, and I think it needs testing by the Supreme Court judges because it is so important.
Harry Miller, thank you for joining us today. Congratulations again on your victory in court. Former police officer won a High Court case after being accused of posting transphobic tweets. Do you think the court has found correctly, or do you think there are dangers in the manner in which Harry engaged on the subject of trans issues?